Um, Thank you very much for having me here to speak to you today. I am in the Department of Sociology. I'm a third-year graduate student. I am also affiliated with the Center for Demography and Ecology. This project is just going to be going through a conceptual framework of one piece of my dissertation project. Ultimately, my dissertation will consist of 3 separate but linked papers exploring family structure, family formation, and individual outcomes across social policy regimes in the United States and Europe. Just quick thank yous. I was invited to participate in this term's CGES Research Collaborative, and also I've received support from the European Union Center of Excellence, the Center for Demography and Ecology, and the Center for the Demography of Health and Aging here at UW. And so thank you to them for the support in my research thus far. Migration politics and policy have really come to the fore in Europe. We've heard a little bit about extra-European migration, but another key piece of the immigration picture is intra-European Union migration. The centerpiece of EU policy is the free movement of workers across borders. And much of the migration debate concerns the consequences of an increasing stock of immigrants and the extent to which states can navigate issues of integration. Whether they're from across the globe or from a neighboring country, immigrants bring with them differing linguistic, political, religious, and cultural practices. Political approaches to managing integration really vary across destination countries and are rooted in country-specific historical and cultural understandings of nationality and citizenship. Theorists of migration often group these diverse political regimes into 2 ideal types, assimilationist and multiculturalist. Of course, there's a third type, sort of more of a guest worker type, but this is sort of outside of the dichotomy that I'd like to set up for you here today. Assimilationist policies aim to reduce the cultural and social distinctions between native and immigrant populations with the goal of integration and solidarity. Assimilation may be a conscious choice by immigrants, an adaptation that's forced by native populations, or it may be an unintended consequence of actions in other spheres of life undertaken to improve the immigrant's own social situation. In the case of diverse native populations, it's unclear to which native population immigrants will assimilate. This phenomenon is generally referred to as segmented assimilation. So, for example, will new immigrants adopt the culture and practices of a native white population, a native black population, or perhaps another immigrant community? So the hows and the to whoms are not always clear. The second ideal type is multiculturalism. A multiculturalist regime allows for, encourages, and often actively promotes side-by-side existence of multiple differentiated ethnically based cultures. Rooted in liberal traditions, majority populations recognize the right of the minority to live in the manner of their choosing. The survival of minority cultures is often taken as a concern of the government. With these 2 philosophies in mind, we can turn to the issue of actually measuring integration. Firstly, I think it's important that we be careful in how we define integration. In particular, it's important to consider that the experience of integration is not a distinct state. So an immigrant is not either integrated or not, but rather integration is a continuum of experience. Immigrant integration can be measured with a variety of yardsticks: economic characteristics or success, educational attainment, residential segregation, linguistic incorporation, or cultural characteristics, such as religious integration, attitudes, or family systems. And so I'd like to focus on this last component of cultural characteristics. Family systems and behavior can be a key indicator of integration. Family is the most basic social institution, and family life and behaviors are central to cultural and societal identity. Family systems are quite resistant to change and are thus quite suitable for measuring integration. The degree of intermarriage between foreign and native-born populations is perhaps one of the most often studied family system characteristics in research on integration. Intermarriage is the strongest indicator of social distance between groups and the degree to which immigrants are integrated into the social and cultural fabric of the new country of residence. However, coming back to this issue that integration is not a distinct state, intermarriage may be a limited indicator. Research on foreign-born populations in the United States across the 20th century suggests that endogamy continues to be salient, and even in the case of groups that are considered to be most highly integrated, such as German Americans. More broadly, there's a well-documented tendency toward homogamy across a variety of characteristics, such as race, ethnicity, education, as well as nativity. Focusing on a state that's uncommon and generally thought to be indicative of immigrants who are most highly integrated in their destination country is probably limiting. So a potentially powerful alternative approach would consider broader patterns of family formation of native and foreign-born groups. This may reveal a wider range of levels of immigrant integration, and such behaviors that we might look at might include the experience of cohabitation, the timing and experience of marriage, and the timing and context of childbearing. So in order to use these family formation characteristics as a measure of integration, we have to take into account the recent changes in European family systems. The host of recent changes in family and fertility in Europe are often referred to as a second demographic transition. This term was coined by Lestag and Van de Ka in 1986, and they took it really, the central piece of this was below replacement fertility. This is a central indicator. Replacement fertility is the rate that ensures that births and deaths remain in balance, and in Europe it's usually considered to be around 2.1. So a woman would replace herself and her partner, and then the 0.1 just is accounting for mortality before the age of childbearing. Let's see, other characteristics associated with this below replacement fertility were also identified by Lestag and Van de Ka, and they included a later age at marriage, a higher proportion of people never marrying, an increase in cohabitation, an increase in divorce and union dissolution, and higher levels of non-marital fertility. Today, aggregate data suggests that all countries in Europe are experiencing some of these characteristics associated with the second demographic transition. However, the timing and the degree of the experience varies across countries. And so these cross-country differences make the comparison of family behaviors particularly useful for studying immigrant integration. In general, major intra-European migrant flows are from late transitioning countries to early transitioning countries. So, for example, in ascending country, we're more likely to see varying levels of fertility. And by that, I mean that sort of before 1990, you would see levels of fertility levels that were higher than in the receiving countries. And then there was sort of a precipitous drop after 1990, and to where levels are much lower than in the receiving countries. Also in the ascending countries, there's a very low age at first marriage, low levels of cohabitation, and low non-marital fertility. Now in the receiving countries, there's a low level of fertility, but it tends to be just below replacement, usually around like 1.7. There's a higher age at marriage, high levels of cohabitation, and higher levels of non-marital fertility. So in this study, I'm going to take advantage of these differences to answer a couple of questions. To what degree can we expect immigrant integration as measured by family behaviors? And how does integration vary across immigration policy regimes? The case study that I'm going to take here is going to be looking at immigrants from Poland to two different countries. I'm going to take France as an example of a country that's pursuing a more assimilationist strategy. I'm going to take Sweden as an example of a country that is pursuing a more multiculturalist strategy. I'll be looking at family systems of these Polish immigrants and be comparing them with native French, native Swedes, and native Poles. As I'm sort of in the early stages of this project, I'm just going to go on to hypotheses that I have here. The first question is really an empirical question. Do we find evidence of family system integration in each of the two contexts? As to the second question, I expect to find divergent results in each of the two contexts. Within the multiculturalist setting, I expect that Polish migrants are going to look more like their native Polish counterparts and less like native Swedes. And this hypothesis is related to the fact that in a multiculturalist regime, there's a recognition of the right of the minority to live in the manner of their choosing and a more of a side-by-side existence. In the assimilationist case, I would expect Polish migrants to look a little more like native French and less like native Poles, related to the fact that there's an aim of reducing distinctions between native and immigrant populations. Of course, there is also this second possibility in the French context that there would be segmented assimilation. but I'm not sure exactly at this point to whom, what population this might be, and so this is something I'm going to consider as the research progresses. Just a few words on why I have chosen the case of Polish migrants. Polish migration is particularly salient. Of course, Poland joined the EU in 2004, and thus Polish citizens gained the right of free movement, not to all countries in 2004, but over time. But even before that, Poland has been the center of European migration. Geographically, it links Eastern and Western Europe, and historically, it's had very high levels of outmigration. After World War II, through the period of state socialism and into the democratic era, there's been really a sustained migrant outflow from Poland. To give you a sense of the sizes of the populations that I'm going to be looking at, in Sweden, in 1998, there were about 16,000 Polish citizens living there, and about 66,000 foreign-born Poles and their children. Poles are the largest immigrant group in Sweden after migrants from other Nordic countries and from refugee-sending countries, and constitute about 3 to 4% of the immigrant population. In France, you have about 30,000 Polish citizens and 76,000 naturalized citizens for over 106,000 foreign-born Poles. I was going to talk a little bit about the differences in family systems, but I really don't want to. I want to leave a little bit of time for people if they have questions. I guess I'll just say, looking at non-marital births, much less common in Poland, and much higher in France and Sweden. But these births aren't necessarily to single parents in France and Sweden, because the experience of cohabitation is much more. You're much more likely to experience a cohabitation in France and Sweden. With the bars on the left, you have a vast majority of women, these are actually women, it will experience a premarital cohabitation in their lifetime, whereas it's very uncommon in Poland. And then for children, about half of children born in Sweden are going to be born to cohabiting couples, and about 3 out of 10 children will be born in France, whereas it's very unlikely to be born to a cohabiting parents in Poland. So maybe I'll just stop there. Yeah. Thank you.